Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. What we intend to do for the next hour, and we only have an hour, is to share time between Bruce Davis and Nancy Van Alphen. Our subject is spiritually transformative experience. These people are filled with many things to say. We could go on for much more than the hour that we have allotted. So they're going to try to condense the most important things about their experiences in 20 to 25 minutes. We're going to try to have about a 10-minute period of time for questions at the end, but that'll mean that we'll be going over time by about 10 minutes. So I hope that that's going to be all right with everybody. My name is Rebecca Vala. I'm a member of the IANDS board, and I have an interest in helping people integrate spiritually transformative experiences. I'm a psychiatrist by training. So without further ado, Bruce Davis is going to start out, and then we'll be hearing from Nancy Van Alphen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. My wife and I, we came here out really a deep sense of gratitude for IANDS and all of you. You're a shelter for many people who are having experiences that they don't understand. And also for me, because I started having experiences in the early 70s and 80s, and in those days nobody was talking about this. And it wasn't until in the last 10 or 15 years, because of IANDS and all of you and your books and your videos coming forward, I began having a whole new framework to understand what I have been going through for the last 40 years. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I have not been back for at least 10 years. And I went to George Washington High School. And in the early 1970s, I was a psychology graduate student. And in those days, psychology was, there was all these new therapies. There was Gestalt therapy, primal therapy, transactional analysis, rebirthing, and I was in the middle of all of it. And I was working at a community mental health center here in Denver, going through all these therapies and practicing these therapies. I was a student at the medical school here, learning Freudian analysis. And in those days, we thought that a whole person is our intellect, our feelings, and if we're having problems in life, it's because some childhood trauma that's unresolved. And in all these different therapies, we were getting in touch with the child. In primal therapy, we were crying and screaming. And after we got in touch with our child, we would slowly become a whole person. And that's what it meant to be a whole person. And then I was in a seminar for graduate school, and there was a woman in the class who was a shaman, and in those days I didn't know what a shaman was. Anyway, one night in the seminar, I was sleeping, and she came into my dream and sat on the end of the bed. It was one of these very clear dreams, and I woke up startled. And then the next morning I went to talk to her, and before I said anything, she said, "Do you remember me coming to you last night?" And she said, "I've been expecting you, and you will be my student." And suddenly my whole Denver childhood, being a normal kid from Colorado, was shattered, and because this reality didn't exist for me. Anyway, for the next 4 years, I became her student, which means that she would come into my dreams and teach me, and she would also take me to dream classes, which I didn't really understand until the last few years, reading things from you people. And these dream classes were on the other side, and I was in a room that had no ceiling, no walls, no floor, but there were spirits in the room and beings like me meditating or studying or reading records. And I would come back and write letters to the shaman, and she would smile. And she said, and this went on for 4 years. And we would meet in different parts of the country, and we'd be in a small room, and she said, "Do you feel anybody here with us?" I looked around and said, "No, not really." And she said, "Well, look again, what about over there?" And there was she said, "There's a family visiting, do you feel them?" Well, not really. And so slowly, she was seeing spirits and talking to spirits and teaching me about this. and she had a telepathic relationship with her shaman where they sent messages back and forth, and there's dozens of stories that went on, and I was just sort of experiencing all this, and she told me that I'm the most stubborn student she ever had. Well, I come from Denver, Colorado, you know. And she would sit with me and look at me, and she could see me in the future and in the past, and she said, slowly, slowly, you will begin to understand what this is all about. It took quite a few years. And during that time, and even more so recently, I want to know, where did she come from? Where did these gifts come from? One time we were in the mountains in California, and she looked at me and she said, there's going to be an earthquake. And sure enough, 30 seconds later, there was an earthquake. And so there were so many experiences of things I didn't understand. And she kept coming into my dreams and teaching me through dreams. I met my first wife in a dream, and then I met her physically about 6 months later, and I immediately recognized her from the dream. And this was all normal in her world, and I was wondering, well, where does this come from? And it turned out that she was from Samoa, and in her small village, every nursing mother was her mother, and every giving father was her father. And so she had this very deep sense of security. And I realized when I was with her how nervous I was, that my mind was always busy. And I was always, wondering, what about this? And then how, she was deeply settled inside. And I realized that was the source of her gifts. I had a normal mother from Denver, Colorado, who grew up here, and a normal father from New York. And they were busy, normal people. I had a good childhood, but I had no framework for all these experiences. And I realized she told me stories about her childhood and telepathy and doing all kinds of psychic games with other children, going into people's dreams and playing and coming out of their dreams. All these things were totally normal for her. And she said, Bruce, one of the important things is she said, Bruce, the answer to every problem you have is always within 3 feet. And this was before the internet and before computers. And that was a big lesson because, in my culture, the answer, you call a doctor or you call something, or you go, in those days there were libraries that you would go to or whatever. There was no Google. And so what it does, it slowly brought me inside to myself. And in modern psychology, we didn't really see ourself as a source for God, for intuition, for play, for spontaneity, for prayer, for presence. So back then, to put the story together, I wrote a book called The Magical Child Within You. And it was about that psychology is more than reliving early childhood pain. Our psychology is also about remembering our magical child, our intuitive child, our spontaneous child, our knowing child, our peaceful child. And I'm told that was the first book on the inner child. It was 1975. And the story of the shaman began in that book. During this time, it was a little bit awkward to live in Western culture. I was having all these experiences and these dreams, but there was nobody giving me, it's like this is okay and this is normal. And we heard about healers in the Philippines and all this kinds of spiritual awareness and psychic events. So my new wife and I, we went to the Philippines, and we spent many months with the healers there. And then once again, the lady I was living with, the teacher, she said, did you see the lady who was standing upstairs all morning? And I said, no. Well, she said, there was this beautiful angel just there all morning long. I don't know how you missed her. And then at night, she would go into trance, and different loved ones from her family or from the village would come through her and speak about heaven. And instead of watching TV, this was a normal event at night. The whole family and neighbors would gather, and we'd all sit there, and she'd go in trance, and her voice would change. And these spirits from the other side would talk about what it's like on the other side. And I miss you, Mommy, but really everything's okay. And this was all totally normal. And we studied with the healers, and they were very poor people. This was in Pangasinan in the middle of the Philippines. And they had no money, no medicine, so they used their hands for healing. and they just, love came out of their hands. And slowly, we were really touched by this, that people were healed by this. And these days, this was in 1976, the healers were becoming famous. They were in the news, and people who were very sick in America or Europe were traveling to see these healers. But they were just with the famous healers. They didn't know where it came from. And again, it came from a deep culture where God is inside of you, and when you don't have all this money and medicine and everything else, you have to find God inside of you. Like you don't know any choice. And you express your love to the God inside of the other person. And that was the source of the healing. After many months of living in the Philippines, we had slowed down. And I remember once we went back to Manila and went to a movie, and normally in America you go to a movie and a half hour, an hour later you forget about it. But we had been so much deep in that culture, that movie stayed with us for 5 days. It just stayed in our mind, and we realized how we had changed living with these simple people, that there was no media. You would just take walks, and the family always would feed us first before they fed the rest of the family. And it wasn't until later I realized that the reason why they fed us first, because they were so poor, they wanted to make sure we had enough food and that we ate before the rest of the family ate. And that was really a symbolic of these people, so loving and so giving and so selfless, that they reminded me of the shaman. It's part of that same kind of culture, so selfless. And in our culture, we want to be important, and we're so full of self and how many degrees you have and what you're doing and all this stuff is important. And in their culture, what was important was how much love we found inside and to share that love. And it was just natural, part of that culture. Now, during this time, I also made my first trip to Bali, Indonesia. And Bali, Indonesia had changed my life then. It was 1976. And I continue to go back every year. In Bali, the whole culture is so peaceful. The people are so peaceful. And they're making offerings all the time. In our culture, we don't really understand offerings. We're like wanting. I want this and I want that. And as soon as we have this, I need a bigger car. And I know that we're always making wantings. In Bali, the whole culture is offering. And you go in front of a bank and there's like 50 offerings in front of the bank. They're praying that everybody has a peaceful, prosperous day. There's offerings all the time. Every home has a temple and it's full of offerings. And so this culture became very interesting to me as a psychologist and as a person. And the people were so gentle and so peaceful. And they have a day of silence where the whole island becomes quiet, including the international airport. It closes down, and it becomes, the airport there now is almost as big as Denver. It just closes down, and it stops. And I was trying to imagine, San Francisco airport just stopping for a day in San Francisco. And the Christians and the Muslims and the other people on the island respect it so much that they also enjoy this day of silence, of just total quiet. And in that day, again, they're reflecting on the silence inside the heart. And so it was very interesting to be spending time in Bali, and we adopted a son there. And more recently, we met this young woman who died in a temple in Bali. She was a very lower class. And a long story short, she came back to life. And she knew all the mudras and mantras from the Vedas, and she became a high priestess. And then she died again and came back with more knowledge. And when we met this woman, I felt like she was my daughter. I've never had this experience before. I've traveled a lot, but I've never met anybody. And she felt the same way that we were her family, and we sort of have adopted her and in our hearts. And it's very special. She's become more famous now because the media discovered her, and she's very, very powerful. The basis of the prayer in Bali is that they remember emptiness, and then they offer everything. And in our culture, nobody was talking about emptiness. So that was the basis of spirituality. They do it every day. They remember emptiness, and then they offer all the flowers of their heart to the one God, all the manifestations of God to their ancestors, and then they remember emptiness again. And I was really curious, where did this come from? And in Bali, the babies are held for the first 6 months. They do not touch the ground for 6 months. And that has become my prayer and my wife's prayer when we work with people, that people feel as if they're held for the first 6 months. Imagine the security inside. In our culture, my mother was very special and beautiful, but she started the first women's bank in Denver. But she was always busy. We were raised by other people. I was not held for 6 months. And so I realized why my shaman said I was so stubborn. And I realized where my restlessness came from and my fears and my busy mind, that we were held for 6 months. Then you have this deep security inside. And that becomes the source of these transformational experiences. So with the shaman in the Philippines and in Bali, these experiences are totally normal. But it begins in the early childhood, this deep security. And we can regain this security because it's part of us, it's in us. There's a part of each of us that is held for 6 months, or is nursed by every nursing mother. It's in us. And it's just a meditation practice. Anyway, I came back from Bali in the Philippines first time. I was sitting in San Francisco airport, and everybody was running around like every airport, and I was really in a state of shock. Where are you going? What's everybody doing? They were so fast after living in these other cultures. And so I started living in retreat. For the last 45 years, I've lived more or less on retreat and inviting people into retreat, because inside we are held for 6 months. And I had this deep question, this must exist in our culture. I come from Denver, Colorado. It must somehow exist in our culture. I'm not a shaman, I'm not a Filipino, I'm not, from Bali. This must exist in our culture. And I started praying. And one of the first nights in Europe, I had this dream, because I've been taught now in dreams, and I was in this great big valley, and it landed on my shoulder, and there was just incredible peace. It was peace without end. And I dreamed about St. Francis of Assisi. And I was not raised Christian, so I really didn't know what St. Francis was. But my friend said, no, there's a special place you should go. It's in Italy, Assisi, Italy. Anyway, a long story short, I finally got to Assisi, Italy, and I've been traveling around Japan and Europe. And so we had 88 people from 11 countries. We all went to Assisi, Italy, and I came home. It was very deep to find this in our culture. We make St. Francis out to be somebody special, but in a way he was really very normal, like a kid from Denver, Colorado. He just made another choice. And his prayer is very similar to the prayer in Bali and the prayer with the different healers. He would climb a mountain in Assisi. He would offer everything. That's where this idea of poverty came from. It's really not about poverty, what you're wearing or how much you have. It's this inner poverty, this inner emptiness. And he would offer everything, and there was just so much love, so much God. God without end. And so I became a little bit of a Franciscan, a little bit of a devotee of St. Francis. And I took groups there for 20 years. And my wife and I finally lived there for 12 years. And we started a center in Assisi, a meditation center, where we just invited people to go inside and first offer everything, and then listen to the quiet of your heart. And in the quiet of our heart, there's an experience, the mind stops, and the awareness, it goes forever, and there's this incredible peace. And one thing interesting happened in Assisi, people were coming from all over the world to come to the center, and we would take them to these special monasteries and so on. This one lady came from Singapore. She said, I don't need, and she was all the way from Singapore, and she said, I don't need to go to Assisi, I'm just going to sit here on the farm. And she just sat there and offered everything and went inside, and she spent a week on the farm. And that changed everything for us. We no longer took people to the monasteries and the gardens and everything at Assisi. We just invited people to sit inside and receive the pure quiet of the heart. So after living in Assisi full time, we came back to America. We have kids and grandkids. They were ready to ask us to come back. And we started a retreat center near Napa, California. And and we just invite people into the silence of the heart. In the silence of the heart, we're all held for 6 months. That's our prayer at this new center. And when you feel held for 6 months, there's this deep sense of trust and security that's without end. And it's normal to find this big space inside that has no borders. It just goes on forever. And in this space, this is why St. Francis had this deep communion with nature, with the animals, with brother, sun, and sister moon. It's the same deep connection that the healers have in the Philippines, that my shaman had, and that the Balinese have. We keep going back to Bali because it's very powerful to sit in a whole culture that feels this way. It's a challenge to be in America because we're so outwardly focused and nobody's talking about emptiness, offering everything, and sitting in this unlimited space of just total pure love. Except for IANDS and all of you. I deeply want to thank you, I want to support you, and I want to share that, you know, it's not important whether you write a book or do a video, whether you tell your story to 10 people or 1,000 people. What is important is that you're an anchor to the awareness. Just being an anchor to this awareness. You touch me, you touch all of us, and it's really important. Our culture, after living in Italy for 12 years on the farm and retreat, we came back, America is hyped up, it's nervous, it's fearful. So it's important that you're an anchor for this awareness, whether you share it with many or no one, it's not important. Just be a beautiful anchor that you are, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, Val and Bruce, and thank you everybody for coming to hear our stories. Bruce is very calming. Wasn't that really relaxing? Well, I'm Italian, so that might change the mood a little bit. But my story is very long. It normally takes me a couple hours to tell it because it's rife with details and stories that branch out from my story. So I'm going to try to give it to you in 20 minutes here. The great thing about it is that the themes that run throughout my STE are themes that are found within the NDE literature. And that's really where I found a lot of validation and comfort in trying to understand what had happened to me. And what had happened to me was sort of out of the blue. I did not have a religious background per se. Was kind of a see and ear up to the time I was 10. It was very limited. I was not a seeker of any kind. As a matter of fact, I very casually in my teen years decided I was agnostic. There was no way to know anything beyond the physical universe until maybe you die. So I just wasn't going to think about it. I was going to live a good life, and I kind of like that golden rule thing, so that's what I lived by. But that's not really what God had planned for me. And I kind of latched on to what Bruce was talking about the calmness. I had been a career gal, working hard, coming home at 9 o'clock most nights, working to the bone, and since the time I was 14. But I finally was able to take a step back and live what I call the elusive life of leisure. My husband had got to a point in his job where he's doing very well, and I was able to step out of work and just kind of do nothing. The plan was to spend some time with my teenage daughter, but I quickly discovered I was a little too late for that because she was always gone off with her teenage friends, and so I was sitting home alone for the first time and just, like I said, enjoying life. One phrase that kind of comes to me is, be still and know that I am God. And I don't know exactly why the STEs happened to me, but it was at a point in my life where I was able to be still for once. About 5 years ago, I was enjoying this life, and I was at home sitting on my couch, flipping through my iPad, reading news stories, and one thing led to another, and I came upon a video of a young man who was talking about his impending death. And I got very emotional about this. I didn't know the young man at all, of course, but I got very emotional. I felt a lump in my throat. I started to feel the tears come out. And as I was watching his story, I got up from my couch to go get a drink of water in the kitchen. And about partway there, my sadness morphed into anger. And I started to yell at God, a God that I never fully recognized as being real. And I started to shake my fists at God. And I was yelling, why do people have to suffer? I don't understand suffering. Suffering is such bullshit. And I remember slamming my fist on the counter and being angry about this. And in the middle of my tirade, I hear a loud knock on my front door, which startled me. It was not evening yet, but I didn't expect anybody there. Nobody ever comes to my front door. But, it startled me, so I kind of wiped the tears away, went to the front door, opened it, and there was standing two elderly people, a gentleman with a cane and a woman standing two steps down with a black shawl. I remember what they looked like. And they said one thing to me. The gentleman said, "We just came to tell you that suffering isn't going to last forever." Yeah, the exact words, never forget it. And I was stunned, and all I could say was, okay, and they just smiled and shook their heads, and it was a little uncomfortable because I was waiting for them to say something else, like invite me to their church or, something along those lines, but they just stood there, and I shut the door. I was like, well, good luck with your mission. I shut the door, and I walked the approximately 8 paces back to my couch, sat down and sprang back up and to the door to find out where they were from. I needed to know more. This was really odd. So I expected to just see their backs, just see them walking away. The gentleman had a cane, and they were elderly. I opened the door, and they were gone, utterly and completely gone. I was in my bare feet. I ran out the door, down the sidewalk, looked both ways, didn't see them. It was still sunny, so I could still see, there was no car driving away. I was flabbergasted. I did not know what to make of this, but of course the thought that crossed my mind was, could these have been angels? It seemed like a direct response from God. I was using that word suffering, which, by the way, I'd never really used. It was kind of odd. But to use that word back to me, we just came to tell you that suffering isn't going to last forever. So strange. So I went back to the couch, finished reading about the young boy, or watching his video. And at the end of his video, he started to talk about an NDE that he had. And his last sentence of talking about this was, "I saw God and angels. Do you believe in God and angels?" I do. And it was like this kid was talking to me from a distance. His name was Ben Breedlove. There's something about that last name that I find interesting, but that's a whole nother story. So anyway, that is what kicked off my STEs. I was at a quiet time in my life, and I was being compassionate for somebody I didn't know. It wasn't kind of even someone in my family where it was a little bit of selfish compassion, It was for someone I did not know. So in the next week or so, I was really heavily focused on angels, and I started reading, whatever I could find about angels. I wasn't really going there to think about God yet. I thought, well, that's a really much bigger question. So I was starting a little small with angels. But somewhere within those next couple weeks, when I was sleeping, I was awakened by somebody standing in front of me and a little bit to the left. If you're just laying there sleeping, you sense somebody might be standing in front of you. I sensed that. And my consciousness awoke. I did not open my eyes, but I was awake within myself. And I saw Christ standing there at a distance. And for somebody who did not know Christ, I knew who he was. I'm sorry about that. So I knew completely that I knew him. And I asked him, I said, Jesus, what are you doing here? I knew I did not expect to see him, but he surprised me by being there. And when I said that, he moved in close, and he took up my entire field of vision. I saw his head and shoulders, but his face was blurred out. And I asked at the time what I thought was the most superficial question. I asked, what do you look like? And immediately when I asked that, my vision was snapped to the right. And I saw pictures, like just flipping through of pictures of people, every type of person, man, woman, child, black, Asian, everybody. And it happened in a heartbeat. But I understood, I am all people. I look like all people. I am all people. And then the last picture it stopped on floated up to the right. And it was clearly a father and a son with their arms around each other. And I was made to understand I am also the father and the son. So my very superficial question, I received a very profound answer. People, and I am the father and the son. And I have a presentation board out there, and I sort of made this Venn diagram showing where we overlap. But the thread that runs through the NDE literature, of course, is the connectivity of all of us. And if that was the message that I was given, it meshes with the connectivity message of many NDEers. So that was the second part of my STE, and I have 3 core STEs that I kind of consider one because they were all in this very compact period of time for me. So I began to read about more spiritual things, but I did not go to the Bible. I was not a Bible believer. I had one in my nightstand drawer my stepmother had given me, but I sort of poo-pooed that. I knew it was manipulated by men, all the kind of things you hear. So didn't read that. You'd think I would after seeing Jesus Christ, but no, So I come upon the idea of reincarnation, and I think it's kind of interesting, and I think that, it has some really important things to, for implications for the world. So anyway, I'm reading about reincarnation. I go to bed one night, and I ask God very casually. It wasn't like I had to know the answer or anything. I just threw out there to God, this reincarnation stuff is pretty neat. Have I ever lived before? And if I did, who was I? That's all I asked very casually. I went to sleep, and in my sleep, I was awakened again, my consciousness. I did not have a vision of a former life. I was given a name, and it was spelled out to me 3 times. And it was a very foreign name. I'd never heard it before. But the letters came at me in this manner, like the first letter, and then the second letter, the third letter. And as the letters came at me, I said the name. The first time kind of slowly, the second time a little more fluently, and the third time very fluently. And the name was Absalom. Absalom. And the third time I said it fluently, I saw it coming off the right-hand top corner page of a Bible. I never heard that name before. I don't know who Absalom was, but I knew that was a Bible page, very distinct look. As soon as I said the name the third time and I saw that, I opened my physical eyes and I was like, wow, God just gave me an answer. I mean, that's really amazing when you realize that. I dove for the Bible that I had in my nightstand that my stepmother had given me, and I did not flip through it. I opened it to one page exactly where the name was. I, of course, went back a couple pages, started, to read the story of Absalom. Now, Absalom was not a good character, I can tell you. He was the 3rd son of King David, but he had his brother murdered, and he revolted against his father, King David, to usurp the kingdom. And he was shortly thereafter killed. So I could not understand how I could have been this Absalom character, and today I'm this person who shoos flies out of the house. I'm very sensitive. I, could never imagine of killing somebody. So I argued with God. I told God, well, thanks for the answer, but can you check your records again? Because I'm not so sure you got the right person. And the next day, I was outside mowing the lawn, and we have a small bank of trees that I always easily mowed under. And as I was mowing this day, I was talking to God, and I was saying, okay, yeah, thanks again for the answer. Don't get it. That was a dream, and I'm a very logical person, very skeptical. I'd always been agnostic. So I was asking God, can you please give me a confirmation that this is right, that I wasn't just dreaming, and that you're right, you have the right, the right person. And as I was mowing the lawn, the best way I can describe this is the tree grabbed my hair. It wasn't just like a little catch, it was a yank on my hair. And you have to understand that Absalom died in the woods of Ephraim, where his hair got caught in an oak tree, and they caught up with him and speared him. I understood immediately when my hair got yanked that was what God was telling me. Yes, it's right. And I had this chuckle with God. It did not scare me. It was just like this real lighthearted moment, and I understood. But that wasn't enough for me. I had to ask for another confirmation. A couple weeks later, I just, throughout my STEs, I constantly argued with myself and found reasons to not believe that this was happening. So the next time, my family and I, we're kind of an international family. We go on a nice vacation every year, long 3-week vacation. And this particular year, we had decided we were going to a tropical beach. My teenage children all wanted to go to a tropical beach. We were set on it. So one night I was sitting next to my husband, again, looking through my iPad for tropical beach deals, and I kept getting a pop-up that I would brush away, and I would, say, oh, darn this thing. And my husband finally said, well, what is that? And I said, well, it's some deal for Ireland. And he's like, well, let me see. This is great. We got to do this. And I said, no, But ultimately, we did something we would never done, and we took the deal. We called, we booked it that night, and a couple weeks later, we were in Ireland. My kids weren't happy. But we found ourselves in a remote location that was 2 hours drive from anywhere touristy, anywhere that you'd really want to see. And there happened to be this castle that not many people have heard of. It wasn't something like, Blarney or anything like that. But we walked in the castle the first day, and again, at this time, all this stuff is heavy on my mind, and I'm asking God again for a confirmation. We walked into the castle, and there was a professor type with what appeared to be 4 graduate students or whatever, and there's a huge tapestry on the wall. And he's explaining that, these tapestries take 50 years to make, and the original family that lived in this castle had to order it, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes on to say, this is depicting the life of Absalom. Yeah, the hair stood up on my arms. So God sent me all the way across the ocean to Ireland to get this second confirmation. Not enough. No. I'm telling you, I'm a hard nut to crack. So, fast forward another month or so, and my sister and I were going to take this 40-minute drive up to Cleveland in Ohio to go to this indoor flea market. And we get there, and the fire marshals had closed the door due to overcrowding. And at this time, again, I was asking God for a third confirmation. I was getting it a little more. I was, bending a bit, but wasn't quite there. So we got to this flea market, and it was closed. It wasn't closed, but they wouldn't let us in. It was a Sunday, and the only other thing that was open was the art museum. And there was a special exhibit going on. You could probably all see it coming. So we went there. Neither of us are particularly art museum people, but we went there anyway. Went into the exhibit, and the first painting there was titled, David Mourning the Loss of Absalom. Now, I'm a pretty, perceptive person. And I know that if you say, I never see orange cars, I want to see an orange car today, that your perception changes and you're going to see more orange cars. But Absalom, come on. That's not a name you hear every day. So, so I lived a life as Absalom. I'm certain of it at this point. But back then, still, I would go back and forth and argue with myself. Fast forward 3 years, and we moved to South Jersey from Ohio, and I'm reading everything that I can, of course, but still not quite believing. I have my doubts. And one night, I'm reading about reincarnation again. And somebody had said, what I was reading was, we've lived thousands and thousands of times. Everybody has. And I'm like, whoa, that's really a lot, And so, very much like before, I went to bed and casually asked God, how many times have I lived? I'd like to know. And I think God was getting tired of me asking for confirmations all the time, because this time, the answer I got wiped away all doubt for me. And I'm just, I went from a person who didn't believe anything to now a person who is 100%, you couldn't convince me otherwise. I know that this other world exists. I know that God or our source or whatever you want to call it exists. But this particular night, I went to bed, I asked my question, how many times have I lived? And I did not get an answer at night during my sleep, but I received an answer in the morning. I woke up, I was in a deep sleep, and for some reason I just woke up out of this deep sleep. And I did not feel hands on me, but I did this weird move of rolling over in bed and doing this stretch of lifting my chin up, as if someone were talking to a child and lifting their chin up. And it's kind of strange to me because I now believe that God is all around. God's not just up, so I don't know why, but that's what happened. And I got an audible answer from God, audible. And the response that I got was, there are 7 in the ground. There are 7 in the ground. I was not scared when I heard the voice. It felt easy. It felt natural. But I realized again, God just gave me an answer. God spoke to me. But I had to wonder, why did God tell me there are 7 in the ground? And I went to bed thinking, wow, I must have lived 1,000 times, at least 1,000 times. But there are 7 in the ground. And I think God's pretty smart, because God anticipated I would wonder, does that include me or does that not include me? So basically, by telling me there were 7 already in the ground, I know I am living currently my 8th life. So again, that wiped away all my doubt of, that my STEs, were they real or was it a dream or was it coincidence? And I, again, I found a lot of validation in the NDE literature, the elements of angels, the element of seeing Christ, the element of reincarnation is really, true. And I think I found my community here, and I'm hoping to spread the message beyond, as all of you probably are too, beyond our community, though, so that we can be a part of this great awakening that I also believe is happening. Thank you.
So much a question as it is just an acknowledgement, because I'm like you, I was so stubborn, and in a good way. But I think those are the stories that lend credibility, because we all want to believe in something, and yet at the same time, those of us who keep asking and asking and asking, maybe we are tough nuts to crack, but at the same time, when we get it, we get it. And then other people can relate too. So thank you for sharing that. I've actually had confirmations on license plates. Was that really my past life name I heard last night? And then a license plate pulls up in front with the name spelled out on it. Or I find an album in a thrift store that's the wedding march of the brother of the woman I was in the past life. Crazy stuff. So I just want to acknowledge you for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
And if you've only lived 8 lives, you're a really quick learner. Because everyone thinks old souls are wise. I think we're slow learners.
Thank you. I
Bless you.
appreciate that.
Thank
and,
you.
I did want to mention quickly, there was originally going to be a gal here who was going to be on the panel, and she couldn't make it. Her name's Emily Rodovich, and she wrote a book called Mystical Interludes.
Oh, fun.
And she is really trying to get people to recognize what you think is coincidence, small coincidences, are generally little things that we've planted for ourselves before we came here to remind us of who we are.
Yeah, it's like we scattered seeds that then we'd find when we're ready.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thank you. It was lovely.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I just want to say that, wow, I mean, this panel today was my favorite so far, and it's been most powerful for me. So maybe she kind of touched on something I was going to say. So if somebody said to you, why do you think we have to, live 8 lives? Would you answer because we have to just keep on learning and growing? Would that be your answer?
Yes, I believe that. And when I tell my story to people, I do tell that everything that I tell other than exactly what happened is my theory, my speculation. A lot of it's based on what other NDEers have experienced, things I have read, including the Bible now, but other religions as well. But my personal belief is that our soul is on a journey, and that we live lives, and I think in my particular life, I look at the life of Absalom and what he had difficulties with. And Absalom had difficulties with leadership. He thought his father was not a good leader. I've had problems, I don't like to admit this, but I've had problems in my career with bosses and thinking that they didn't know what the heck they were doing. And right now I have problems with some of our political leadership. But I realize also that those people are on their journeys and they're in those roles for their soul's growth. So I pray for now the people that I feel could be seen as standing in my way. Now, very much like somebody in the last panel on the NDE or Colorado talked about her sister, Nancy Grignon, talked about her sister who was an addict, who was actually, her role in this life was to be an addict to help her sister's growth of her soul. So I see it in a whole different perspective now.
Wow. And something that strikes me, and I was telling somebody the other day, I can't believe going through life how many people, and I don't know the statistics, don't believe. And I'm just shocked. I was born and raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic school. My religion, spirituality was a big part of my life. My mother always said, what do you think, this just happened by accident, that we're just down here? And, so I was raised in a family like that. And I am just shocked at so many people I encountered day after day. I'm a retired nurse, but I'm on a board of a humane society. I also am involved with a clothing charity. So I meet a lot of people out and about. And I'm just shocked at how many people don't believe. And there's so much sadness, I think, and so much struggling. And I've come to conclude, because I've had so many shocking things. I mean, just shocking. You talk about coincidence. And I have come to conclude, and I don't know if you would agree with me, is that the reason there's help there, but people just don't ask. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that. My first husband was an atheist.
Yeah.
And so that was very difficult. It's difficult enough being an agnostic. I personally didn't luckily have too many challenges in my life, and I got through them pretty easy, but even being an agnostic can be difficult. I can't imagine being atheist and not having any, hope of anything more. So yeah, that's difficult.
Hi, I just want to say thank you both so much. Bruce, you said something that touched me deeply, this business of being held for 6 months. In 1991, I had a huge accident and was not able to hold my 1-year-old child for 6 months. And I tried to make up for it after that. And he's 27 now. And I think the fact that I consciously knew that he missed 6 months of holding, for 6 months I could not put that child in my arms. And so I deliberately made an extra effort.
I couldn't agree more. This has been, I think, the perfect panel in that, you know, your incredible history, as I listened to that, and so many things you said touched me, and I made so many notes. And but my question is for you, because the intensity of your, and kind of, it seemed like a short duration. And what is interesting is going from not really being a believer to believing very solidly. And my question is, what was the immediate changes that you saw after your experience?
Changes in my own life?
But, well, just however you experienced the world or how people experienced you. But it just seemed like there was a definite demarcation as opposed to a long, drawn out.
There was, and I always kind of say, you know, some people are seekers, some people have NDEs. I was hit over the head with a hammer, you know, immediate kind of thing. But I am a hospice volunteer. I've been for the last 3 years. I've done a lot with Big Brothers and Big Sisters. So I've always been kind of a sensitive, compassionate person without the spiritual component, I guess. But after these things happened, I don't know, I just had a drive to help others. I guess that comes from God. I never really questioned that, but that's probably the best I can answer that.
I don't really know what I'm going to say, except mostly it's directed to Bruce. So, primal therapy, yes. Holotropic breathwork with Stan Groff, yes. And in those very important healing experiences, as we were all trying to awaken in the 70s, spiritual experiences came. And for me, it was a dream, and then Kundalini awakening, and then meeting a spiritual guru, and bigger Kundalini awakening. And then 15 years of Kundalini experiences, which sent me right back into therapy. And then more therapy, more healing, and not being held as an infant, knowing my history very well now from before birth on, is so profound. And the wounds are so profound. And it takes so long to heal. And I went, and I think most people don't know how long it takes to heal those profound wounds. And I've been to Bali, and I really tuned into those 6 months of being held, and how profound that is, you know, how settling it is. And here I am in my 70s, and still bit by bit healing those wounds. And it seems as I do, I see people more clearly. I see their wounds, and I just see more and more. I think we're all trying to get back to who we really are, beyond the amnesia that comes, you know, when we're born into this life. And I just want to say thanks for your story and how much I relate to it. So thanks.
Is this working? I just wanted to share, after all these years and trained in all the therapies and everything, we teach a very specific meditation, and that is to go into our hearts and listen to the pure quiet of our heart. And as we do that, we offer all of our wounds, all of our mental worlds, we offer everything. Then we go into our heart, listen to the pure quiet of the heart, and then here there's this awareness that goes forever. And the second part is you want to receive the most pure love. Mm-hmm. And we found in a few days, as a psychologist, I no longer believe in psychology, to be honest with you, that this expanded awareness in our heart, and we receive the most pure love or the most pure peace, it heals our emotional wounds. It connects us with our source. Mm-hmm. And So after 45 years in doing primal therapy in the early 70s, that's what I've come to.
Interesting. What I found is that through the Kundalini awakening and experiencing the divinity and the oneness of everything, that was so profoundly healing, but it didn't make all the wounds go away. And there were still wounds in the body that had to be released through more therapy.
I don't think the wounds
So-
go away, but the personality becomes thinner.
Yes, absolutely.
And as our soul, our spiritual being becomes stronger from the meditation,
Yes,
we still have physical bodies that don't work so well.
yes.
And we have our personality that has some wounds, but we begin to understand that our personality is only clothing.
That's
It's not
true.
who we are.
Absolutely.
And so this expanded awareness and pure heart is who we really are.
This is absolutely true. And I guess this is true. And I think with my experience, have received that awakening, it gave me the strength then to go back and do more of the nitty-gritty releasing work. Because before, when I did not know who I really was, I didn't have the strength to do the work at the most profound level. Then when I knew who I really and everyone else really was, then I knew it was just stuff that had to leave the system. That's all it was, and I could do the work then. So that was my experience with that. It was back and forth.
We're
So
gonna
I
have
call
to
it the
stop.
psycho-spiritual journey. You know, it's all under one umbrella. So
We've gone over time, so
sorry.
any further questions, if you could just do them one-on-one,
Sorry.
okay?
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your attention.